Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Merry Christmas. It's technically the day after Christmas right now. It's about 12:34. Neighbors are partying across the street, so if you hear any EVPs on this track, it's the neighbors next door, not some spirit. Unless it's like really apparent, right? So today we're going to talk about EVP, or the electronic voice phenomena. Some of you may have heard of this, some of you may have heard of this and forgot about it, and some of you may have never heard of this at all. This is the electronic version of something I said the other day, which is if you can create something very delicate in the universe, then the most delicate influences within the universe might be able to manipulate that delicate device and thus communicate with us. So I'm going to read you a little quote from Thomas Edison, who supposedly said this. Gets the internet, so, who knows? But it seems like intelligent people have this curiosity. So the quote says, if our personality survives, then it is strictly logical or scientific to assume that it retains memory, intellect, other faculties, and knowledge that we acquire on this earth. Therefore, if we can evolve an instrument so delicate as to be affected by our personality as it survives in the next life, such an instrument, when made available, ought to record something. Interesting. Now, if any of you have any more knowledge about Edison's little foray into this thing, now's your time to be the expert in the comments. Now, I'm just going to preface this, okay? You are listening to the voice of someone who has always, since it first occurred to me, and I have no idea when that first happened, probably most definitely in a scientific way in my mid-20s. And I've mentioned this a couple times in other episodes. But there have been, a variety of people that said that if there were methods of communicating with the present from the other side, I shouldn't mention present like there's a time envelope here, but if they were able to communicate with us from the other side, that they would. Houdini's wife said that he said he would try everything in his power to communicate with her. Now, we're going to go through a few other techniques that might be possible before jumping directly into EVP, so that EVP has a really nice perspective. John Lennon said he would float across the room as a feather. Now, I'm going to give you one that apparently worked. And I don't even know if I should mention the name, if it's too private to mention. But it seems cool. Doesn't seem like it's going to hurt anything. But I'll pull the name just for now. I don't know if I've said the name in the previous episodes. If I did, then you know already. But a close friend of mine who passed away told his partner, hey, because his partner asked him, do you think you'll try to contact me when you get to the other side? And he immediately replied, when you see the unicorn, you'll know that's me. Yeah, you know what? I think I already mentioned this once. It's Sid Mead. Sid Mead told his partner Roger that that's what's going to happen. Sid Mead's favorite show on TV was The Simpsons, believe it or not, which just, it's a brilliant show, don't get me wrong, but just amazing. He's followed it all the way through since the early 90s. Wasn't it 1990 that show debuted? And so Roger turns it on. What a brave man, right? Turns it on downstairs, and there's an episode. And he said the only episode he watched at the time, he says there's a unicorn in the middle of the episode, and it's not the butt of any joke. It's just there. Who knows, right? Obviously, the episode was probably created before Sid passed, so that influence would have to have been an orchestration of time and influence. It's very interesting. Either that or we're living in a matrix, man. Now, before we get into EVP and some of the principles behind it, I think it's important to remember James Randi from our previous episode. He said that, when psychics and what have you, mediums claim to talk to the other side, there's never any prolonged, intelligent conversation that seems to remedy anything, that seems to be, one good conversation where someone is connecting a dot that just can't be connected unless you're on the other side. The other sad thing is if these things were real and all these psychics were talking to people and all that kind of stuff, they seem to not really gain any knowledge on the other side. To say, oh, it wasn't the grassy knoll, it was the drain, dinosaurs didn't exist, the earth isn't round, there's no interesting just epiphanies like that. And, maybe there's rule systems, they don't go spilling the beans to the living. But like James Randi said, he said his grandmother, in case you didn't see the episode, he said his grandmother died and there was supposed to be a will. The attorney knows there was a will, but she must have either misplaced it or hid it, and nobody knew where it was. They never found it, but it is truly the easiest way to mitigate the inheritance instead of letting the state get involved and perhaps give it to the least popular child for that person's existence. But this is the process of recording something with electronic equipment of any kind. And I really mean any kind. It could be this camera right here, this microphone, which is on a separate channel. And then the way that this phenomenon is discussed is that you never hear the voices typically while you are recording. You will even ask the questions. You say you want to talk to a relative that just passed, a friend that just passed. You'll ask the question and you won't hear anything when you're recording. And then when you play it back is when you actually hear the embedded messages. And there's different classifications of the way that the messages come back, which are classified in A, B, or C. So I'm just going to read them to you real quickly. Class A is an easily understood by almost anyone with little or no dispute. They're also usually the loudest EVPs. Class B is usually characterized by warping of the voice in certain syllables, lower in volume and more distinct sounding than Class A. Class B is the most common type of EVP. Oh, excuse me, not distinct, distant, excuse me. I'll learn how to read one of these days. Class C is characterized by excessive warping. They are the lowest in volume, often whispering, and are the hardest to understand. So essentially, A to C, it just gets worse and worse and worse in terms of the quality of these recordings. Now we're going to review the light history of folks who have claimed to have heard these and recorded these. But I went on a binge because Dark 5 talked about this in one of his episodes. I don't even know what year it was, but I watched it this year. Probably did it this year. And, it's one of these things of, there's this weird trend with quote-unquote researchers. And I do not mean to diminish anyone's exploration into something whatsoever. But you'll have people read about this. They'll perhaps, in this particular case, listen to something that's fairly convincing. And so they're like, wow, I got money, I got equipment, and I got time. I got intelligence, and I know about this, so let's start doing it. And so they will attempt for a considerable amount of time, considerable amount of money, because time is money. And oftentimes they won't succeed. They are very open-minded. They want this thing to occur. Now, in some cases, they will publicize the fact they're going to do this, which is the kiss of death. Because then your character gets involved with it. Oh, that crazy nut over there doing that. And then you let that amass on you without results. Well, it would only be natural to try and stuff it in their face if you still believe that maybe you're not picking up on the signal, but everyone else is who claims to have done so, which is a handful of people. And then they tend to go off and collaborate with someone else. So they've got a bunch of machinery. They are recording tons of stuff, not getting anything back. Then they'll go off with someone who is famous for doing it. And all of a sudden it starts showing up. That for me is a very suspect pattern in all things. A lot of the fake paleontology of the study of the dinosaur is rigged in this sort of thing. They read a paper from a guy who was a Darwin disciple that there probably was a gigantic race of beings before man. It's like, how do you get that theory, man? And instantaneously, search, 6-inch tooth. Oh, builds a Tyrannosaurus Rex out of a tooth, right? There's no replicator from Star Trek Enterprise in the holodeck that can synthesize the DNA of a lost tooth. This isn't Fifth Element where you have a part of her hand and you can make the rest of her body. So this dude who found the tooth makes a fake dinosaur, shows it in a museum for, God, I don't know, 30 years. And even after the guy's dead, it's shown. And then all of a sudden, the first dinosaur bones they find are exactly like this replica that he made of this fake thing, you know. Sometimes we just got to give it up. Can't believe in crap anymore. Now, the other thing is that what if you are known for this kind of thing? And, you know, again, there's this thing we have to remember, and I forgot to mention it in my episode about the psychics, is that you may actually have a talent. Let's say you're a psychic, and you have a talent that works or has worked unbelievably in the past. And let's say people witnessed it, and they're like, oh my God, that was very legit. Even James Randi's going, oh my God, that's amazing. Looks like you really got a connection here to the other side or whatever. But you can't make it happen again. For whatever reason, the gift of it just eludes you, or it could be even that you're not relaxed enough until you're by yourself. It's one of those kisses of death where it's like the guy in E.T. You know, Elliot meets E.T., and it's all good and fun and games until the government shows up. And the one dude that shows up inside that little, plastic tent, he was the guy that said he had seen E.T. a long time ago. I think that's the story. And so he was waiting forever to see him again. So you have UFO people. Whitley Strieber, for instance, writes all the books about UFOs. It's Communion, Transformation, or Breakthrough and Transformation, I think, is the sequence. Well, maybe he was truly abducted at one point in his life. Maybe even they fiddled with him for years when he was younger. Although it's interesting how he only wrote about it later as an adult, and meanwhile he wrote a bunch of movies and books in the meantime. Not sure about that guy. And so he wants them to come back, so he writes about them almost like bait. I dare you to come back. I'm writing books about you. Come and stop me. And he's just trying to get them to come back. So potentially, someone could have EVP'd something. It's a 1 in a million thing. They're going to be the only person in a particular year or decade to ever do it because the magic storm happened. The perfect storm happened, and they're there. I mean, when I had if you've never heard this show before, this is going to sound kooky. You know, when I went back to Disneyland after having that Walt Disney experience, you don't think I wanted to see the guy again? But I immediately conceded that will most likely never happen again in my lifetime. It was a 1 in a million situation. Don't know why. I think he was probably just there. I was there, and Bob Gurr was there, and so there was a kind of a frequency. But the one thing I forgot to mention to you guys was that, in all honesty, gun against my head, lie detector test connected to my body, I would have to admit that I was getting serious Walt Disney vibes for weeks, if not months, before he did walk up and say something to me. Almost as if he was hovering around me and letting me have his presence, this feeling, which I think a lot of folks have that feeling, because you can see through the corporate sponsorship, you can see through what they've done to his franchise, and you just see his fingerprints on things, because this is, again, as I always say, the only park he ever went to is Disneyland, which is like 8 miles that way. The only reason why I say 8 miles is my car broke down a block from the park and I had to get it towed, and that's what I was charged for. But this EVP thing, they really stress the fact that there's no gender constraints, there's no age constraints. Now, I have personally never heard any recordings that sound like children. And I haven't heard any recordings that sound like a woman, but I'm going to read you some case studies where this has been claimed. You know, my grandmother came to me the day she died. And so, okay, well, that was to tell me she was on the other side and she was okay. And then 2 hours later, I find out that this woman I didn't know was near death had died. And so imagine you're recording something and that little bumper of life never occurred. Your grandmother, your mother, your friend or whatever never got to say goodbye. And let's just say you're of a psyche where they don't know whether or not you have a good position with the afterlife. And so they're visiting you so that they can make sure you're okay. Now, any of my relatives or friends at this point could just simply listen to this program and go, yeah, we don't need to visit that guy. He's got a total belief in the afterlife. He knows we're okay. Don't need to cover any bases. If we talk to him, he's going to say it on his show, so we better not talk to him. But perhaps a long time ago, as human beings were more stoic, less integrated with the afterlife, I guess. You know, everything was kind of spooky and religious in the past, and people really felt like they needed to follow rules, and if they broke rules, they were going to hell, and hell was always fire and damnation, you know. But there's some dispute about where these voices would be coming from, and I'm actually very happy to learn that that's how at least advanced the conversation has become within that particular, I would say, category of events. I wouldn't want to say industry. So the first common thing that you would think is these voices are from dead people. I guess, technically. Now, technically speaking, it may be a little arrogant for us to say every spirit that exists out there has been a human being, has been on planet Earth, and is communicating with us directly as a return visit sort of thing. You know, I initially fell into that as a kid when I started to think about folks that had passed. You know, I had this weird experience. I've only said it once on a show where I had a distant cousin of mine that got killed in a truck accident because two girls were driving the truck. One girl was driving the truck. There's another girl and then my cousin. And they were doing donuts outside of a softball park. And there was a brand new bathroom that had been built out of corrugated steel. They had all been drinking. So her judgment probably wasn't the best, but she was trying to get out of the vehicle because she was sure they were going to crash it. The problem was a little bit of logic was missing, which is, hey, outside the car, you're going to get into more trouble because she's out of control driving the truck, right? So anyway, as a result of hopping out, she ends up getting combined between the truck and the trash or the restroom and lost her life. It was between 9th grade and 10th grade in my school. 9th grade was still in middle school. 10th grade was your first year in high school. I go into French class. I get a book, and her name is right in the front. She was the last owner of that book. This was all fresh. I mean, it was like this had just happened. We just started school. Some weird thing with my hometown, like if any kids are going to die, it's just a week before school starts. I mean, the amount of crazy accidents that have occurred that have either taken life or severely, wow, I'm going to make some new words up. One per episode. Severely injured. It always happened the week before school started. It was just weird. And so that just sort of kind of woke up. That was the event that just sort of catalyzed my mind to, wow, we die young sometimes. And it's I got to live my life 100% and sort of vicariously for these people that pass. And then a year later, one of my best buds and one of my little idols, man, one of the coolest dudes in the school got nailed. And we had spent the evening together the night before, and he just literally left me and then went and got killed on a motorcycle accident. So anyway, the reason why I mention that is that you eventually start to adopt this idea that there's probably souls out that haven't been human before. They've been other things. So they're aliens, maybe even insects, birds, whatever. Maybe they were a rock for 100 million years just 'cause, right? But definitely voices from the dead is one of the philosophies of where these voices come from. The other one is that they come from other dimensions, which I think is sort of a cartoon version of just a soul that hasn't been a human. Because immediately, what's funny is you get these folks that come in and start splitting hairs and start getting to the semantics of what's going on with this thing, and they go, well, okay, if they come from another dimension, then how do they know English? And it's like, really? I don't know. I'm just thinking learning a language on the other side might be really easy. I don't know. The other one, which I thought was really interesting, was that they theorized that these voices might be coming from the subconscious frequencies of the gentlemen or women who are recording this stuff. I think that was super insightful. That is one that I would not have probably come up with without some other catalyzing event to open my mind to such a thing. And then, of course, you get your religious side of things, which is that these are either angels or demons. Now, I have a very close friend of mine who is extremely credible human being, and she told me a story about being in her home. At the time, she lived in England, and her parents bought a really cool old home, pretty damn big. And her and her boyfriend had been chilling out in the room, she was the only one in the house with this guy. And at one point, there's just a second story to the house. I don't think there was a third, but maybe there was. But anyway, she's up in the living area of the home, and she had gone to her sister's room to try and see if she was home, I think. And I don't know if it was when she touched the doorknob or approached the doorknob, but she said she heard literally a monster on the other side of this doorway. And she said it growled at a level that was sonically loud, just gigantic. It seemed to have volume on the other side. If you heard a cat barking on the other side, or meowing, a dog barking, and then a Tasmanian devil or a demon on the other side that might be as big as, Andre the Giant or something, it's going to have a different tone of voice. And she said this thing was just ferocious, insane. And she said for the rest of her life, she was like, look, I don't know why, but demons can penetrate this universe. I don't know why they do it. It didn't say anything. It just essentially warned her not to come in the room. Now, the other thing was, just like me in the kitchen and the macaroni and cheese thing from the previous episode, the boyfriend was there, and both of them just nearly wet themselves on this thing, because it was like both of them are like, what's going on, man? And she said it was so inhuman that it couldn't have been someone playing a prank on them on the other side. Plus, pranks always, sort of pan out, right? I mean, they, someone's like, I got you, man, you're like, you son of a bitch, that didn't happen. No one was in the home. Now, the other one is the shortwave radio solution, which is, it's a hoax. And I can say most definitely from the Dark 5 episode on EVP, just look up Dark 5 channel episode EVP and you'll find it. There are definitely charlatans out there. It's very, very similar to the, God bless him. I think he was American, but I'm not sure. Some of you may have seen this. There was a guy out there who said he could channel aliens from other planets, and he would sit in his chair, and it was like at will. He could just contact these beings. Like, they were never busy, they were never asleep. And the funny thing was that he invented this claim back in the day when X-1 was on the radio. Forbidden Planet, the movie, was just made, other things. And so the guy would tense up in his chair, close his eyes, which is typical of someone who is scared a bit of the hoax. He's like, don't look at me while I do this, right? And he would talk like this, and he would talk like, I can't even do it, but he was talking like one of those robots from the 1950s. It was like, by your command, it's like one of those kind of voices. And you just thought, why on earth would that be the case? Why on earth would anyone have to change the voice of the receiving person? If I was channeling to you, I'm giving you impressions of what I'm saying, and you may or may not ever hear my voice at all. But this idea that channeling in his particular claim would have been someone has completely and utterly taken over his body. So he's not really channeling as much as surrendering his body to be completely controlled, which is a very classic thing that seance people do. And then I guess it would be, and this is where it gets a little silly. Think about all the conversations we've had about how the soul is who you really are, and your body is the trumpet, and your mind is the song that pushes through the trumpet. And so you just have an instance of your consciousness, which is what you are. There's what you are in this world, visible to the rest of us locked ethereal beings. So the way that we speak, the way that I'm speaking to you right now, is built out of 50 years of muscle memory in my cerebellum. How I stress my vocal cords, how I make things happen is based on my body. If I took over your body, it's like that old movie with Lily Tomlin and Steve Martin, which I think is All of Me, where they swapped consciousness. There's a bunch of those movies out there. And he talked in her voice, and she talked in his voice. Now, there was a mannerism. It's like Jack Black being the blonde in Jumanji. But it's still his voice, for the most part. So this idea that an alien comes in your body and brings with it some legacy muscle memory, where would that be coming from? But maybe because the brain doesn't store a damn thing, and that might make some sense. But this guy was just some tomfoolery malarkey, man, in my opinion. Now, I watch, and if you guys are interested in this subject matter at all, this is going to seem like a little bit of a left field thing, but this is related to radio technology, especially radio technology as soon as radios were invented. There is a wonderful channel on YouTube if you are interested in the fundamentals of electronics. It's Mr. Carlson's Lab. It's a dude in Canada. He's just seems like one of the nicest souls on planet Earth. He restores old electronic equipment, and one of his specialties are these restorations of old radios. He buys them from, estate sales, gets them on eBay. His only requirement is that the case itself, the dials, all the molding, the buttons, that those are in pretty damn good condition, because it doesn't matter beyond that point, he can restore this thing. In the restoration process, he takes you through, and some of these videos are half an hour because he fixes them so easily, and some of them are 2 hours long. But you will learn so much about electricity, about how components work. He has classes on his Patreon with how to learn electronics. He even has a lot of free courses up there you can watch. But you will learn, well, the first thing he'll do, and this applies to this episode, trust me, he finds, there's no motherboards back then, so there's like a chassis, a big metal chassis, and they have tubes in them, which are giant versions of components we have that are tiny, and then they have these kind of wax capacitors on the bottom, which look like big M80s, and he'll do a huge restoration on all those components, and then he has to calibrate it. And calibration has to do with sometimes crystals that have to be aligned, but a lot of it has to do with the tuners in the front and a couple, I forgot what they're called, but they're the units that adjust the frequency that the radio picks up. And usually what ends up happening is, as the electronics inside the radio from like 1938 was one I just watched, and he restored this thing, man, it just plays radio stations just like yesterday. I mean, it was just really cool. But people will get in there, and I've done it as a kid, and you get in there and you put your little plastic screwdriver in there because they're all electrically charged. Sometimes these chassis are so hot, depending on how you put the plug in the wall, because they don't have one of the little plugs being bigger than the other to isolate the chassis properly. He always converts it up. But sometimes these chassis can kill you if you don't fix it before you touch it. It's crazy. But a lot of these components are real high-powered electrical stuff. Even just a bolt that just looks like a little tiny nut can kill you. I mean, it's just going to be really careful with this stuff. But you have these plastic screwdrivers that can adjust and the calibration. There's usually a couple in them, depending on how many bandwidths that it's able to grab onto. This one from 38 had like 5 different bandwidths. It was just amazing. When you watch the guy calibrate a radio, and I've probably seen him do a dozen at least, you'll realize that you'll be picking up a lot of scratch from a lot of different areas. Because of 2020, we really became aware that churches use shortwave radios to broadcast into cars. In case you don't want to go inside, the church is full, or you just rather sit in your car, and you can sit out there, and as he's preaching inside and everyone can hear him in the pews on the speaker system, it's also being broadcast in a shortwave radius around the church. And so you can pick it up in your radio. Eventually, drive-in theaters do that today now, which is so sad because something about putting that ugly-ass speaker on your car window is just wonderful. So in terms of someone recording something and trying to pick up any certain frequency in the world, it is absolutely, positively simple to infect someone's recording process with a voice. On the Dark 5 episode, you have some that are very, I guess, type C or B, the really difficult ones to hear, and then you will hear an A. And when you hear an A, which is, everyone in the room would just go, well, gosh, there he is, whoever's talking to us is right there. It really seems to me just like Mr. Carlson's lab. He's just picking up something local and someone's outside going, hey, my buddy is the psychologist that this guy is collaborating with because the guy who started doing it has been doing it for 5 years, never picked up one EVP. And now he's collaborating with my buddy who's famous for recording EVPs, and now we have to deliver the goods. So his buddy's outside in the little, military radio pushing in the frequency, obviously being very careful not to overstimulate it. But remember CB radios? They could do it. You just have to know the frequency that's being sensed in order to push a frequency on it. But now what's interesting about it is that before we get into these case studies, you still, to Mr. Randy's point, you don't have someone immediately identifying themselves. You don't have someone, even if it was a demon. Did you ever see Exorcist? For those of you who missed it, you got Linda Blair, who I've met one day. I'll show you the picture. But Linda Blair was this little kid, and she's possessed by the devil, and here come the preachers, and her mouth was insanely bad, and she was drilling into them that she knew where their mothers were, and just pushing all their buttons psychologically. And it worked several times. Now, if this was a demon, wouldn't they come in as a relative and start misguiding you very specifically, very quickly, identifying themselves as whoever you want to hear? But then, let me give you an example of the way a demon might communicate with you. One, they might be like Needful Things, the book that Stephen King wrote, and have you go off and do little tiny things in your life that would then, destroy your life. Or let's say that you're a widow or a widower. They come back as your husband or your wife, and they then engage you on a level that, because the demon would know everything about your life, wouldn't they? And then they kind of get your credibility that they're real up. And then all of a sudden they would start telling you how they didn't love you at all, how you were this or that. All of your worst fears and insecurities about your relationship would just be right there on the tip of their tongue, telling you how bad you were, to destroy you. Wouldn't a demon do that? In all my research, I haven't heard anyone claim that the voice was coming after them sort of in a personality level. So I'm a little dubious about that. Now, if it's an angel, well, of all the beings that might talk to you, an angel would have most likely the biggest rule set of communicating with the living through some EVP thing. It would almost be like they get in trouble with the big man if they did such a thing. But then what would an angel say? Encouraging things? Would they forecast something that you better be careful, something's coming? Don't know. But I haven't heard any conversations that have been translated that sound like anything an angel would say to you. So I think that that's just low-hanging fruit, and, you got to study all your options. So one of the first recorded ones was in 1940 by a guy named Reverend Drayton Thomas, who was collaborating with a woman named Gladys Osborne Leonard. Well, these two names of these people, man. Just getting together probably creates some havoc in the universe, right? But she was a well-known medium of the time. And we're talking about 1940, so we just came out of the Dust Bowl. It's kind of that carnival time. And the more primitive man is, the more man will believe, of course. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. Don't know. But he said that working with her, he had recorded several voices. And then he later claimed that one of them was his father. Very interesting. Now, in terms of, again, these stories go dry very, very quickly. How to find the recordings, it's very, very difficult in some cases. But how would you know what one was your father? And then if some guy tells you, no, one of them was my dad. Well, I would have to tell you, I mean, my dad's still living, but if he were to contact me afterwards, or any of my friends that have passed away, there would have to have been something that only the two of us would know, And I'll give you an example that's totally fictitious, right? One of my buddies, Keith, he died of spontaneous brain tumors. I mean, he was fine, and then 13 months later, he's dead. Crazy. Young guy, 46 years old, from Huntington Beach. And he moved to my hometown in Kansas, and now I live in his hometown. So bizarre. But he and his wife got married on the beach down here. Apparently after knowing each other for about 30 days. And they stayed together till the end, man. They'd still be together today if he hadn't passed. But now he knows something about my goals with him that I don't even think his own family knows that this is one of my goals, which is that, and I've mentioned him once before, but he used to restore Harley bikes, really old ones, Indian bikes, and old trucks, old pickup trucks from the 30s and 40s. And he was also a house builder. I mean, the dude, just he could do anything. Most humble dude on planet Earth. And that's just kind of how I wanted to retire. I wanted to move back to my hometown, just chill out with him, just go out and do crap. So if I ever picked up on a voice that identified itself as Keith, I'd be waiting for him to say something like, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to build the bike. Sorry we didn't get a chance to do this or that, and something, or I used to paint murals outside of his house using smoke bombs. And if he said something like, man, I really appreciate those, I really miss those smoke bombs, I really miss 4th of July with you or something like that, then, man, I'm getting closer. Now, of course, a demon could say the same thing, but then it would have to turn dark. And I know that my friend Keith would never say a dark thing between the two of us, ever. And so these are the kind of elements in those claims that I would have to hear in order to buy it. And I just don't know of any specifics. And they always lack specificity when they claim these things. Okay. So another one is this is a crazy name to say. It's Adela von Zwasley, I don't know, and Raymond Bayless. So it's Szalay. I'll try to find these people's pictures and put it up there. And if I can find some of their recordings, I'll try to insert it in the episode for you. But this is Szalay guy, or Zwasley guy. He got some 78 RPM pack bell record cutter and player, I guess. And he tried from the late 1930s into the 40s, the early 40s, to record and get some of this going, and wasn't able to find any success. And then he teams up with Raymond Bayless, who claimed that he could just do this at will in the 50s, and all of a sudden, using a radio that Szalay put together, they had much better results, as it was described. I'm going to be honest, that sounds like the one that's the one where it's just a voice talking right back to this guy on the radio that I heard on the Dark 5. It should also be noted that most of this occurred right when radio first came out, and it sort of boils away now. But again, most of you who are interested in EVP, and you might be drawn to the episode by EVP experiences, you're probably the expert and could probably guide us to much better videos. So let this just be a little hub for those of us that are interested in more stuff. Now, another guy named Marcello Bacci. There's a restaurant down the street called Bacci, which is amazing. But towards the late 40s, he claimed to be picking up voices from a vacuum tube radio of the deceased. That's all he said. And again, it's one of these situations where, let's say I put together something in my house here, and it's super sensitive, and I'm doing all kinds of things that I can do to perhaps improve the integrity of picking up other shortwave radio. And I don't tell anybody I'm doing it so no one can broadcast into my house something to confuse me, right? No, they didn't easily have this technique in the past, okay? So I'm not dragging anyone over the coals for not pulling this off in the past. But today we have cell phones and, video cameras and all kinds of stuff. So it's not a problem for me to completely document the attempt to do such a thing. It's like I could do a video like this and not release it and then say, okay, what I'm going to be doing is this is a little radio. I work with Mr. Carlson in Canada to come up with this really sensitive radio. He has no idea what I'm doing. And I got a recording device hooked up to it. Maybe even find out what this Bocce guy's radio was and buy the same thing and then pull off this experiment. And now if I have any successes, it's all going to be recorded live. But now, we'll get into other folks attempting to do this as well. And that'll help us button it up. Now, there's two Catholic priests, Father Arnetti and Father Gamelli. I think I'm saying these right. Actually, I think I'm saying them wrong, but whatever. So they were recording Gregorian chants at one point. And they kept having the microphone break. The microphone cord would break. And so at one point, Gamelli said that he said a little prayer to his father and said, please help me with this situation, or will you help me with this situation? And apparently, while the recorder's still going, he claimed to have heard his father say, of course I shall help you. I'm always with you. Now, it's probably Italian converted to, translated to English, so it seems a little formal way to respond. Of course I shall help you. I mean, that seems like something you write down on a piece of paper, not something that you say. But I'm assuming the translation is where that comes from. Now, I like the thing that I'm always with you, because that is something I think is a very godly statement. That's a very spirit thing to say. And it is something that is, I believe, true, and something that is rarely ever said when talking about the afterlife. So the guy that's known as the father of EVP, which I don't understand how that works, but this guy's Frederick Jorgensen. I think I'm saying that decently. 1959, this dude is recording bird sounds. And he said that at one point he could hear his mother say, in a very endearing way, Frederick, you're being watched, Frederick, my little Frederick, can you hear me? And he said it was his mother. Apparently he wrote two books, Voices from the Universe and Radio Contact with the Dead. So he really monopolized this thing up into a profit-making situation. Now, obviously I haven't read those books. The books, I would hope, would say something about this is exactly how you pull this off. Because there's going back to James Randi's sort of mindset, the skeptic mindset, the idea would be, if this is so prevalent and capable, that this would have utterly exploded to the point where someone would have created an invention that you buy and you put it in your house and you just keep it around in case you lose somebody. Perhaps someone, if someone's 95 years old, okay, and their eyesight's bad, their body's kind of given up, their need to come explain something to you, unless it's like James Randi's grandmother who's like, oh, by the way, I put the I put the will stuck on the underside of a cabinet in the kitchen just because it was like a place I used to hide other things. And now I just thought, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell one of you guys. I didn't think I was going to die when I did. So thought I had some more time to tell you about this. That makes sense. But the fact there's no just kit, some Heath kit you could buy to give you this capability seems a little suspect. Why are so few folks from the other side communicating like this? Seems like everybody should be afforded the same thing if there's no rule in the universe that the afterlife can't come talk to you through a radio. So one of the guys is a Latvian psychiatrist, or psychologist, I should say, excuse me. And he was Dr. Konstantin Raudiv. Always some weird name when it's something awesome. No offense to foreign languages or foreign names. But he had heard about this other guy's work and his 2 books. And so he immediately started recording in the 60s. And he said by 1967, he too had recorded his mother, essentially saying his name, his childhood name, and then saying, "This is your mother." And he supposedly has recorded thousands of EVP recordings. Interesting. Yeah, I will tell you that if you go out and try to listen to some of these EVP recordings, if they're not type A or class A recordings where you can just simply hear it, right? The other 2 take a tremendous amount of imagination sometimes. You'll hear this, and it's sort of like the Beatles album that said, "Turn me on, dead man." You hear that, and then you're like, they'll tell you what you're hearing, and then your brain sounds it out. It sort of snaps the sound into place. So there's a couple, George and Jeanette Meek, M-E-E-K. They, I guess, have recorded hundreds of hours of this in the 70s and 80s, and allegedly, they said that they captured the voice of Dr. George Jeffries Muller, who was a NASA scientist who passed away in 1967. Okay. So those are the big ones. Those are the big ones that made it into the worth mentioning column. Now, let's look at this again. Let's pull back a little bit and say, isn't it interesting that the individuals that wanted to record EVP immediately found results? Even if they took 10 years to do so, they all got results. Well, let me ask you this. Do you have a family member, at least in your past, if not present, that has a scanner in their house? Listening to everything in a small town. It's a big deal in a small town. It's actually kind of cool. But boy, you can't get in trouble in a small town with the police and not come home and have your mom or dad just up your snuff because they heard the whole thing on the air. Sometimes that can be kind of nerve-wracking too, because they'll say something like, "Oh, it was a big accident at so-and-so and so-and-so street," and your parent is sitting there just waiting to have someone identify the person. Especially if they say the word fatality or something, they're just on the edge. Of course, today we have cell phones, so it's much better. Back in the day, it was pretty rough on the system. And there was always arguments about, stop listening to that damn thing, Driving me crazy, driving yourself crazy, and me crazy. But let's look at the overall proposal that's going on here. Let's pull out of EVP for 1 second and just simply say, you're at some military briefing, you're at some intelligence briefing where money is not an object. Invention is just a fingertip away. And somebody asked somebody else in the room, so what is this whole thing, this EVP thing? Well, apparently, there's a reliable way of talking to the dead. And someone in the room hears that. From military, government, some rich person. Just a rich person alone. And you think about, okay, what would that mean if that could be done? Well, how much could you learn from dead people? And there might be a bias from the dead people, right? So say the military says, well, we would really like to know where Tesla left all of his stuff that John Trump wouldn't got. We'd like to talk to anybody. Anyone famous or I should say worthy of interviewing after their death. Perhaps they can reveal something. If you're dead, then we assume you would have access to all of the world. Meaning you could remote view. You could say, hey, could you tell, you love America. I'm going to be talking to Abraham Lincoln, and the Republic is under attack in 2020. So let's have a conversation with Abraham Lincoln, and let's find out, okay, Abe, we need a coup de grace. We need that death blow to knock these MFers off the planet. Hit them where they don't know we know they exist. So anyone out there who believes in America, and I apologize to my non-American listeners, I'm just giving you an example. Substitute your leaders and your objectives. Please come in, Abe Lincoln. And so they would listen. And hopefully Abe would come in and go, they're all hiding in Sri Lanka, whatever. Now, I'm unaware of EVP government research, but we know that remote viewing became a multi-billion-dollar research project between the Russians and the United States United States intelligence, excuse me. So it seems like that would be a really valuable capability, doesn't it? Now, of course, everything could be subverted, but at the same time, if laymen have not only done it, but documented how to do it, down to the hardware, then it would seem that anyone who really wanted to talk to someone, you lose a loved one, you lose a child, a wife, a husband, a father, a mother, and you feel like they got pulled out of this universe way too soon, celebrities that pass away. I just watched this British 60 Minutes on George Michael. You just look at these people who pass so soon, and you're like, oh my God. I don't know what you get off of them if you got a chance to talk to them, but there's plenty of case scenarios where this would be very desirable, and money wouldn't be an object, even if someone said, well, the radio you need to buy is going to cost you $50,000. Even if that's all the money you had, sometimes you'd be like, I will give you 100. I'll give you 50 bonus if you can just organize the conversation between me and my past relatives. But I want to hear real information. Don't tell me you just love me and everything's okay. I already assume all that. That doesn't have any value to me. But I want a conversation. Right off the bat, within the second half of the military conversation, someone would say, all right. I heard this kind of crap before. What is the current claim? How does this work? And then some expert who's been studying this goes, okay, well, it comes in through 3 different classes, A, B, and C. A's great, B's rough, and C is really hard to hear. Okay, well, we also have technology that unscrambles things, descrambles things. So let's say you had a furry voice. You also might create a device that says, okay, I'm talking into this 58 mic right here. So this is one of the most famous mics in the world. It's $100. All those nerds out there buying $5,000 mics and dangling it in the scene so you can see it. They're just wasting their money, trust me. But the military could easily create a device that says, okay, everything that's going into the input device is being recorded not only on the track that's trying to pick up this EVP, but it's also being sterilized in a separate track that's going to be used digitally now to pull off what we put in. So the only thing left is what we didn't put in the system. Therefore, you have the cleanest digital EVP recording on planet Earth. It's not slopped into everything else. And there's a sensor. There's a couple sensors inside this. It's actually stereo mic. So just the second the sensor's done, you get this copy sent off to this other device. And then the wire that's going all the way to the machine, that may be where the EVP is starting to occur, is the differential. They have the capability of enhancing photographs, like in Blade Runner. They can take really blurry crap and make it super duper clear through all kinds of fuzzy logic and big machine learning. I guarantee you we have probably never seen it in public. But the stuff you've seen in sci-fi shows is probably damn near capable. And it's almost capable to a point where I think one of them, I can't remember what the hell show it was. It was a Star Trek. It was a Star Trek where they actually triangulated the face of someone behind a crowd of people. And they were using a bunch of like ambient reflection information, ray tracing information to say, okay, well, there's a little bit of a blue haze there. And so they were figuring out what the person looked like behind the crowd. Now, that might be a little much of a stretch. The audio, man, do we have that down pat. So it would seem, in addition to all that, legitimizing of the EVP system, the military, and all kinds of intelligence and all these professors would have legitimized it. And maybe it does work and everyone's still poo-pooing it, so it never gets any attention. That seems really hard to believe. Because there's always someone out there with money, man. My science teacher in high school, I think I told you guys, this dude built his own synthesizer from scratch. He built an observatory inside our high school, meaning he built the dome. He built the star projector from scratch, man. He drilled, I think, 1,100 holes in this piece of mylar or something with the exact drill bit size to make sure the star map was showing up properly. I mean, he said he broke so many bits, it was crazy. And he turned this thing on, I'm just like, oh my God, dude. This dude could build anything. He ground his own, at 13 years old, he ground his own reflective lens telescope with a piece of glass stuck inside of a trunk of a tree. That's him at 13 years old. You mean to tell me if this dude who lost his wife just before I met him, that's how I learned about cancer and physics all at the same time, if he thought he could talk to his wife, I guarantee you he would have built that system and worked on it endlessly until he got the nightly conversation with his wife until he joined her. I looked up my teacher. He's still alive. He's in his 80s now. Crazy. Again, the other one is foreign countries that take this stuff a little more seriously. I think Russia has always been a very open-minded society with many things that the West minimizes. They believe in the meridians of the human body. The way that in my opinion, chi or ether moves through the body. They understand, acupuncture is nothing more than freeing up the chi to move through your body more efficiently because you developed currents of chi that are blocking things. That's ether, man. It just is. I was watching a video the other day from a doctor who said he had developed a tremendous amount of pain in his body. And so he went to the formal doctors and found out very quickly that all they were doing was prescribing drugs to him, turned him into a pharmacy. But then he went to an acupuncture person, and he said, they poked me with a ton of needles, and even though it exacerbated the pain I was having, as soon as they were done, I never had the pain again. And he says, I know I can't go back to my fellow doctor friends and tell them my success because they're so closed-minded due to med school that he'll be a heretic of some sort. I mean, how pathetic is the world, man? But I think the Russians, who are very into this kind of thing, I don't know anything about the association with Russia and EVP, but they would be the kind of country that'd be like, okay, we built this little toaster, and here's the conditions of which you use them, and here's usually how you solicit the dead. And maybe a little handbook that says, by the way, you may not receive any message from your relatives, but you may receive someone who lived in your house before you, who passed away, who just always thought this house was a super comforting place to be. And so they kind of retreated back to this home to kind of live out their years. Or maybe they died in the home. Walt Disney didn't die in Disneyland. He died in like Cedar Sinai or something. He's at the park. Trust me, he's at the park. I think Edison's take on the thing is just fascinating if that story is true. Because it's the telekinesis story I just told, where you find a delicate balance of force that would take the most infinitesimal measurement of change to see the effect occur. And with EVP, it is a brilliant idea from Edison to say, look, I'm going to make a radio that is so absolutely sensitive that it would pick up, signals from the other side. And think about Tesla for 1 second. Because I don't know if there is, this is what's the big mystery to me. Let's say this stuff is totally legit. It's simply because we haven't tried, we haven't heard it, and so it's easy for us to dismiss it. It's interesting that a random mother of one of these scientists or enthusiasts would hear their mom. Because at some point, there's a mechanism on the other side that makes this possible, if it were true. Meaning the mother would have to learn electronics to some level. Because if she didn't learn how to disturb an electromagnetic frequency, then she would never be able to communicate with their son. All right. Tesla is a guy that understood electricity like no one else on Earth. And what's really strange about that statement is I think we're pretty sure, even in 2020, that Tesla remains if he had stayed alive. Let's see, he's probably about 180 right now. Yeah, I guess he'd be about 160 something. Anyway, that dude would be able to make sweet love to your electromagnetic frequency inside your calibrated radio, wouldn't he? Wouldn't he be able to do that? I mean, this guy could probably play a symphony to us just with his fingertips playing around with stuff. But his ability to communicate with us would be, I think, absolute if this technology actually can do what we think it can do. Now, it could be the game of the, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but it could be the game of the layman. The layman doesn't sanction themselves with communicating with the living because they don't see the ramifications of doing so, whereas maybe a Tesla, being highly intellectual, might say, I shouldn't do this because I don't want to infect the future with any inspiration that isn't organic. Maybe. Now, the other side of the game would be other forms of communication that it just begs the notion that this wouldn't be the only method that they would be using to communicate with us. So you have EVP. Let's just say it's totally legit. There are some hoaxsters in there, but there are some, maybe even more than 50% of it is real. All the recordings we've ever heard. Okay. But now we have television. Now we have cell phones. Now we have earbuds. Imagine you just put your earbuds in, which are probably functioning on milliamps. And so you would think that earbud every once in a while will come up with a signal. Maybe some artifact on your television shows up. Some symbol that is most definitely a relative symbol. Maybe they always liked, how many of you have a relative, okay, that collects unicorns, collects turtles, collects princess dolls or whatever. They're a collector and they always have this thing. And all they need to do is show you that thing. And you're like, oh my God, let's just fictitiously say that you never thought it was a good idea to collect all this stuff, and you thought it was a huge mess when they passed, that you had to find someone to take all this stuff off your hands. Maybe kept a couple out of nostalgia. And so you're not one prone to gather this simply because the other person passed. And then all of a sudden it shows up. I'm like, man, I'm not even a fan of this, and there it is on my TV. Some unicorn blemish in my 4K television, which was only there the night before, stayed there for about 10 minutes. I even walked up to it and looked at it. Maybe even grab a cell phone picture of it, whatever. And then case closed. The other one is sort of the UFO picture argument, which is, well, this actually spans history for a long time. Before the printing press, God was on Earth a lot, right? And then the printing press sort of calmed down a bit of those rumors, a bit of that evolution. No new gods anymore. Whatever we had by the time the printing press came around, it's pretty much what we have. Joseph Campbell was probably the only people that said he met a bunch of angels and had a big experience. But then again, his stuff's always sequestered away. He lies about translating ancient Arabic. He wrote the book of Abraham, but what he was really staring at was a funeral notice of a death of someone in Egypt. I think it might have been a pharaoh, but I'm not sure. But he was reading, now we know how to read that. When he was doing this fake translation, he was full of it. And he said that, Native Americans had the wheel and iron, iron and steel swords and all the stuff they didn't have. And so the guy's busted. But when does this phenomenon of EVP arrive? Well, it arrives right when radios arrive. And then it sort of ends. The last thing I read to you was a couple in the 80s. Now, there was one sort of central theme. Now, I think we're using an oscilloscope. They tend to be using older radio systems to make this happen. Now, that could be that those radio systems are the ones that have this happen. You would think Mr. Was it Mr. Carlson's lab? That dude would be picking up EVPs all the time. Maybe he's not listening for them, but they're coming through. Don't think he records them either. So this idea of having where you can't hear them while you're recording, but you hear them when you play it back, maybe that's part of the gimmick. But it seems that when something becomes popular, it becomes noticed, which might be discovering something, and then everyone can get into it, but then it dies off. Could you imagine old 30s and 40s radios selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars because those components actually pick up EVP and the modern systems don't? Imagine the quote-unquote authorities find out it really does work, and so they scramble to re-engineer radios so that it can't pick up EVP. Still wouldn't stop the modern age, because we'll go back and get old radios like Mr. Carlson does. UFO sightings were really popular when 35 millimeter film was the method by which we took photographs. Now that we have digital devices, it has tempered quite a bit. Again, a lot of art students are creating fake UFO reels just to test their skills. And it comes out later. It was, some art student. The siren sounds that they keep telling you about, the ones where this incredible wailing noise happens in Russia, happens in the woods, and it's like some crazy psyop from space where someone's put a satellite up there and they're just broadcasting something down. There are videos. This did occur several times, but someone quite immediately, the Russian one, it was a sound that was coming out of a soundtrack from a movie. So the only thing that was going on was that no one could locate the speakers. But someone was playing this really, really loudly from a sci-fi program. And it happened to correlate with that series that I think Neil Blomkamp made a couple of those movies, and I forget the freaking name of the theme of the movie, but he made like 2 or 3 of them. And those sounds, I believe, are in his movie. So it kind of was a beautiful viral marketing technique to get everybody into alien stuff, so that when his movie releases, everyone's just on I gotta see something alien because there's this weird stuff going on, and we're just kind of in the mood to do that, If EVP is real, like I said, the quality of EVP today should be absolute. If the afterlife is interested in communicating with us, there's a million techniques, Ghosts in general that are visible. Again, the one I saw was mind's eye, so it was inside my head. I didn't get any sense that it was visible in the outside world. Okay, well, that's a technique. Then there's the actually making an apparition in the room, which, what does that require? Well, if we understand that photons are a verb, then they just shake the room. And it doesn't have to be Abraham Lincoln sitting there, holding his coat and got his beard and his hat on and starts reading, the Gettysburg Address. It doesn't have to go that far. You just are maybe hurting. You're sitting in your bed at night that normally has someone next to you, and that person's missing. And you're just staring into the darkness of your room. And you're just saying, come say something to me, man. Do something. Obviously, we're not going to have a conversation necessarily unless you're EVPing things. But just make a little light in the room. Go up to the filament of a 60-watt light bulb that is currently off and just run your soul through that thing super fast, like Superman, and get it to excite just a little bit. Maybe those requirements are a little high. And what if there's a force that a force maximum that a soul could exert on this reality? And so we have to temper all their techniques of their communication to devices that run on milliamps or even smaller amounts of electricity. There was a great episode of Star Trek. I think it's Enterprise, which was from 2001 to 2005, where one of the beings, or it was maybe, I don't know, maybe it was Chakotay, I can't remember. There's a few episodes where spirits of quote unquote dead members on the Enterprise, whichever episode or season this might be in, but one of them got stuck on the outside and they were chasing the ship, and they were on the outside of the ship and the inside of the ship, and it ended up where the being had figured out that if they put their hand through an LED in the ceiling, that it lit. And so they kept hitting it in Morse code. But Morse code wasn't used anymore in the future, but they had managed to do kind of an SOS sort of thing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I think eventually someone picked up on it and they figured out, oh my God, they're actually alive. We got to do X, Y, Z to bring their body back. Love Star Trek for that kind of thing. So imagine we've got some sort of, well, think about this, man. This is my cell phone right here, okay? All right, well, it's got miniaturized components. And if you go look at Mr. Carlson's lab, again, the laptop I'm using is the one I repaired the diode on that blew when the power supply fed the computer too much stuff, thank God, but it fried it straight off the board. And so I had to get in there and, find it, which was pretty easy because it was all burned up, but the pad came off the board. I mean, it was just really insane. Everything I tried to fix the pad didn't work. So I ended up fixing it for about $1.60 by getting a new diode in there. Okay, so you're on a telephone, which has got miniaturized components. The amount of electricity these phones use is less and less every single year because everything gets miniaturized. So the full functionality of a resistor, a diode, a capacitor, a coil, a CPU is all just tiny, tiny disturbances in the force. Okay, well, what's memory? What's a hard drive? What's an SSD? It's a bunch of ones and zeros being stacked up inside memory. All right. So you have this device and you stored a Word file somewhere on your device, and they just go into the file and they start flipping bits to the point they put a message in one of your text files. Again, they disturb some pixels on your screen. They put the Tron logo right on your screen, And so you see it and you're like, oh my God. I don't think that the afterlife would lack any creativity when it comes to these kind of things. Do you? I mean, do you think you got Tesla next to you, you got Faraday through Tesla with you got Steinmetz with you got all these super geniuses, Richard Feynman, Oppenheimer, all these guys that really built things in the world, unlike Einstein. And they're sitting around just going, oh my God, we could do so much. And hey, you by yourself trying to hit that bit on the SSD is not going to make it happen. But if we line all of ourselves up, we get 1 million souls to line up, and we're all going to pounce that bit at the same exact time. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. If body surrendering possession works, you're sitting there typing your little email to your friend or whatever, texting something, and this friendly possession occurs, and they take over your fingers for a split second, even just erase your consciousness for a split second. They've taken over. And now you're just like, you're typing some message from them to you, but you're going to either saving in a file or you're about to transmit a text to somebody, but it's right there in front of you. I don't know why these things wouldn't be the next stage up. The radio was simply a mechanism because it was susceptible to modification. So why wouldn't this start going up into other devices? Why stop there? If one of you is super technical and you think, man, I know why, and please put that in the comment below. because I would love to advance the theory even more. Because if you come up with restrictions and we can get around them, wouldn't that be exciting, like episode 2? And if any of you have ever done this, I'd be really interested. Either you were present when it happened or you tried it yourself and you had some success. I mean, guide us to your files, man, so we can hear it. I'll put it in an episode dedicated to you. If you've done research in this and you think you've heard very credible situations, do please share that as well. You know, we're stuck in one of these situations where it's like, I don't know if you're like me, one of the reasons why I think communicating with the dead, which I hate saying that, communicating with the formerly human is so appealing to me is that this universe gets boring after a while. It really does, man. You're just like, all right, what am I going to do? I'll do this to make money, and maybe some arbitrary group of people thinks that that's really cool. I mean, if I could tell a story and really affect people in a positive way, that's euphoria. But I mean, you know, going off and creating another video game or whatever. We need something new, man. We need a new frontier, right? We need something really fun. And I think that this is an interesting little kind of foyer into the possibilities that perhaps there is a mechanism to help them communicate with us. And just to kind of pull back to a very esoteric thing, which I'll relate to this, I'm going to give you it just occurred to me. So take that crazy example I gave you with a potential true telekinetic thing where I talked about the piece of pottery hanging on a fishing wire and then concentrating on it, we could get it to turn one way or the other. Because it's such a minimal amount of force to make this thing move. If it's holding still, it is just a miraculous event that someone didn't open the door, the heater didn't turn on, someone, you know, took their sheet and went whoof like that, and the thing would start spinning. That's how sensitive this thing was. And so imagine every communication protocol that we've ever created outside of true voice and apparition visions. Which again, if one ghost is possible in this world in a visual form, then all ghosts are capable of doing it. All of them. And I know that a lot of people would see a ghost in their bedroom and absolutely be traumatized for the rest of their lives. You know that's the case. But your relatives, your friends, they all know if you're the kind of person to be able to handle it. And yeah, I don't think that any one of us would ask to see a ghost, then actually see one and not have our heart rate go through the roof. But it would be almost like crying for happiness and not crying for sadness. So your heart rate goes up because you're happy, not because you're terrified. And so I think that there are plenty myopic, very stoic PhDs out there that have dead loved ones that they know that if they came back in an apparition, this loved one's going to do just fine communicating with the other side. But a protocol for communication is usually some form of Morse code. It's some form of binary. It's some form of ones and zeros that make things happen. So just as a ridiculous example, imagine taking this porcelain on a string thing, something else on a string, things on strings, and you line up a bunch of them. You line up like Stranger Things did when she wanted to talk to her son, which was stuck in the other dimension. She had created it was brilliant. I love it, man. It was A through Z on the wall using some childhood, education decals. And then she put Christmas lights on every single one of the letters that were off. It wasn't plugged in. And the kid would come in and turn the light on and just like a Ouija board, spell something to you. Of course, Ouija boards are accused of doing the same thing. I don't trust any situation where human beings are touching the device, that's potentially moving it where their subconscious wants it to go or whatever. But I know some people have had some pretty legit, scary Ouija board things. But again, sometimes you have like your hand, someone else's hand, and it's just like one guy's pulling your leg, right? But so you line this thing up. Whatever it is, it could be electromagnetic stimulation that signifies the ASCII character set, all uppercase. And then they just start talking, man. Boop, boop, bop, boop, beep, boop, bop. And just, you wouldn't even have to even be there. You set the device up, you put digital devices to sense movement, voltage spikes, and the computer's just recording the letters while you're asleep, while you're away. Put this thing in a basement. And all of a sudden you come back and there's, William Shakespeare's next piece. It says, signed, Francis Bacon. Anyway, this stuff fascinates me. I've had the EVP thing on my phone for a very long time. Maybe if we record the helicopter flying over and then slow it down and play it back, it's like, we are watching you. I keep thinking the helicopter guys have to be looking down at this patio going, what in the hell is that guy doing? And we can fly by at 1 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and this dude's got all these lights on, because it's way brighter where I'm sitting than where you're seeing it after the filter goes on. I'm definitely interested in your take on this, because, if we had Deep Thoughts University, this would be a whole wing of the college, man. We'd be coming up with all kinds of devices, studying all the previous claims, the hardware that was claimed to be used, the parameters in which the hardware supposedly achieved successes. And, I think we would target very specific individuals. And I don't know if it's one of these situations where it's like UFOs are always claimed to be showing up in very remote locations, because there's not to be mass knowledge of their existence just yet in any type of proven day the Earth stood still landing in Washington, D.C. sort of situation, And so perhaps these are mothers talking to sons and that sort of thing. Because we know there's a massive connection between mothers and their children, which is straight up psychic and amazing. Again, when I was in my first and only car accident here in California at 18, I got home, and just like Elvis said with his mother, when he got in a bad car accident, she didn't have voicemail back in the day, but I did. And I had a little voicemail machine, and it was recording on my voicemail when I got home. And he was like, Mark, I just want to try to make sure you're okay. I just had a weird feeling. And I was like, holy crap, that stuff's real. A mother can sense when her children die. So much so that militaries have used, I think it was the German military, they were taking rabbits. And they'd have a mother have like 4 or 5 rabbits, and they would put the child rabbit on a submarine. And they would put like EKGs and various neuron sensing equipment on the brain of the mother. And then they would kill the kid bunny out there on the submarine, and the mother's brain would go nuts. And they realized this is 100%. And it was so reliable that they developed emergency protocols using these rabbits, meaning it was to say, let's say a submarine was going to go out and find out if the foreign fleet was out there. So instead of transmitting a radio signal back home that might expose their location, they killed the rabbit, and that would tell the ground forces, hold, don't deploy any more boats, wait till we get back with the information. I mean, that's huge. That's a whole Dark 5 episode on that. So there's a lot more to this reality. And so I'm not inclined to dismiss everyone's EVP experience. I do believe I've heard some shortwave radio malarkey. But other than that, I'm just trying to find out why it happened predominantly between the 1940s and all the way up to the 80s. But you never know if the 80s is true. I don't know. Maybe. And then why it sort of died off as a pastime when we have the internet, man. The internet should be able to harvest together everyone who's had a success, therefore understanding the hardware requirements, and then those who wish to experience it. I have a very close friend of mine who's been to South America. She's done ayahuasca for 4 weeks, had 8 different doses, had amazing experiences. She's also been to just every single cool thing, like sound baths, and just she's been to foreign countries and went to temples and stuff. Extremely open-minded person, and she would be a kind of person that could get into this and probably find the success in it because she has an extremely open mind. And I don't know if it requires an open mind. Maybe you don't. It shouldn't, honestly, if it's being recorded. But for those of you out there, and I used to know a bunch of these guys in the game industry who were like sound engineering experts. You You deal with sound processing chips. You maybe even be deep in the government and unable to communicate with any one of us, but you have the equipment to filter out sounds, or you've got a buddy or relative or son or a daughter that knows how to do this kind of stuff. It might be fascinating to say, I'm going to throw you something really crazy. EVP, blah, blah, blah. You think you could hook me up a radio that could do such a thing? And just have fun. Maybe you're the 2.0 of the whole movement. Anyway, let me know what you think. And on that note, please go to deepthoughtsradio.com and bookmark that baby. So if we get moved around, then we are good. You can still find me. I will say that in the midst of the censorship, which we haven't had any 5-packs destroyed recently, it usually happens like when I don't release episodes. But because I think I did 5 days with 5 episodes at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, U.S. time, PST, our viewership's off the chain. And I got a notice inside my YouTube studio application telling me, oh my God, whatever you're doing is blowing up your views. Your views are up 61%. So when I told you we were getting massive views, that's the case. We hit 60 years of listened hours on YouTube, which is, for our little tiny show with almost no subscriptions and all that kind of stuff, we're doing good. I don't think anyone else really calculates that metric. So I think some of these folks probably have like 1,000 years, if not more. But for a little tiny show that nobody knows about, I think that's pretty good. So anyway, feel free to pass it around. Again, everything you need is on the site in terms of audio and video, social media, ways to donate, all that kind of stuff. We do have a Patreon. Patreon will get you the episodes. If I stick to this new format, which I'm going to release everything around noon to 2 o'clock California time, that gives European folks a chance to listen to it when they get home. It'll be a little late for you guys if I do it at 2, I know. So I try to get it around noon, but my sleeping habits are all messed up right now. But I'm also trying to pipeline everything so the audio's ready the second I release the episode. So those of you who only listen to podcasting, get it whenever you want to hear it. I know some of you work late shifts, and this is sort of a nice little break. So I very much respect that, and thank you for listening. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now. Welcome back to